The hot sun hung above the quiet town of Carterville. Dust blew across the wooden street as the sound of hooves echoed between the old buildings. A lone rider approached, dressed in black, his hat low, his silver spurs clicking with every step. The people looked up from their work, froze for a moment, then quickly looked away. No one greeted him. No one smiled. They just watched from behind windows and half-closed doors. The stranger's name was Hopalong Cassidy, but no one here knew that yet. He rode a tall black horse and carried himself like a man who had seen too much trouble. He wasn't looking for a fight, but trouble had a way of finding him. He rode slowly through the town, studying the faces, the empty schoolhouse, the cracked church bell. He felt something was wrong. Deeply wrong, even in the Wild West. This kind of silence meant fear. At the saloon he dismounted, tied his horse, and walked in. The piano stopped playing. Men at the tables went quiet, eyes cautious. Hands close to their holsters, the barkeeper, nervous man with shaking hands, poured him a drink without a word. Hopalong nodded but didn't smile. He didn't drink right away. Instead he asked, "Where's the sheriff?" The barkeep swallowed hard, then said, "Sheriff Jenkins don't like strangers." Hopalong raised an eyebrow. "Does he like crime?" Someone laughed nervously, but no one answered. That's when the doors slammed open, and two men in dusty coats entered. One of them wore a tin star, but crooked on his chest like it meant nothing. "Name's Jenkins," the taller one said. "And you are?" "Just passing through," Hopalong replied. "Name's Cassidy." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Cassidy. How long?" "Cassidy." Hopalong didn't answer. He didn't have to. The sheriff's face went pale, then he forced a smile. "You're not looking for trouble, are you?" "Only if trouble comes looking for me," Hopalong said calmly. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then the sheriff nodded and walked out, but his men stayed back, watching. Hopalong finished his drink, left a coin, and walked back outside. That's when he heard its screams, smoke, and the smell of burning wood. He turned fast and saw flames coming from the edge of town. People gathered but didn't move to help, just stood frozen, afraid. He didn't wait. He jumped on his horse and rode toward the fire. It was the schoolhouse, small and old, now on fire, its roof cracking. A woman stumbled out, coughing, holding a small child in her arms. Her dress was burned, and her face was black with smoke. "Help others inside," she gasped. Hopalong dismounted and rushed in without thinking. Inside, the air was thick and choking. The heat burned his face, but he found two children hiding under a desk, crying. He pulled them out one by one, kicking open the back door to escape the flames. The woman had collapsed, but still clutched the child in her arms. He picked her up and carried her to safety. Once outside, someone ran with water. Others shouted, but no one dared look at Hopalong straight. He laid the woman down gently. Her eyes opened, tired but sharp. "You're not from here," she whispered. "No, ma'am," he said, "just passing through. I'm Lucy." "Lucy Benton," she said, coughing again. "They burned the school." "Because I wouldn't leave." Hopalong looked around, saw the people still frozen in fear. He realized then this wasn't just some quiet town. It was a town ruled by fear, and someone wanted this woman gone. He helped her sit up, and she looked him in the eye. "Will you stay?" she asked quietly. Hopalong looked back toward the saloon, then toward the smoke behind them. "Maybe a little longer," he said, tipping his hat. The wind carried ash across the sky, but something stronger than fire had just arrived in Carterville, and the ones who ruled the town with fear were about to meet their match. The next morning, the ashes of the schoolhouse still smoked in the wind. Lucy Benton stood outside her small cabin, eyes tired but filled with quiet fire. She refused to hide, even after the flames tried to silence her. Hopalong Cassidy stood nearby, watching the burned school in the distance. He had seen many things in his travels, but a teacher who wouldn't run from danger, that was rare. Lucy poured water from a wooden bucket. Still limping from the night before, her arm was bruised, but she didn't complain. "I told the sheriff who set the fire," she said softly, "and he told me to stop asking questions." Hopalong narrowed his eyes. "And who do you think did it?" She didn't look at him, just whispered. "Reynolds." Bart Reynolds owned most of the land around Carterville. He controlled cattle, supplies, and half the buildings in town. He smiled in public. But the town whispered that he didn't need guns, he owned fear. Lucy said her father had once fought Reynolds in court over a land deal. 3 days later, her father disappeared without a trace. "No body, no answers," she said. Just silence. Hopalong rode out to the edge of town, to where the land turned wide and dry. There, a tall ranch gate stood with a gold letter carved into the post. 2 armed men blocked the path, their hands resting on their belts. "State your business," one said, chewing on a piece of straw. "Just looking around," Hopalong replied calmly. "This is Reynolds' land," the man warned. "No visitors." Hopalong turned his horse without a word, but his eyes caught something in the dirt, fresh wagon tracks, leading into a trail that didn't appear on the town's old maps. Back in Carterville, he visited the general store, where an old man named Pete worked the counter. Pete knew things he had lived through too many hard winters to play dumb. "Reynolds gets what he wants," Pete said, glancing around nervously. "But lately he's been buying land that don't belong to him yet. Threats." Hopalong asked. "Sometimes," Pete muttered. "Other times, men disappear. Like Lucy's pa." Hopalong leaned in. "Why doesn't the town stop him?" "Fear," Pete whispered. "And the sheriff's on his payroll." Later that night, Lucy heard a sound outside her cabin. She stepped out with a lantern, but the wind made the flame flicker. Suddenly, a rock hit her window, and then another. A shadow moved fast near the barn. She shouted, "Who's there?" but got no answer, only silence. Hopalong had been sleeping in the barn, just in case. He stepped out, rifle in hand, and moved through the shadows. He saw movements, someone running, fast and low. He chased them through the trees, crossed the creek, and up the hill. But the figure vanished into the rocks, like a ghost. When he returned, Lucy sat at the kitchen table, shaken but stubborn. "You want me out," she said, "but I won't go. Not until I teach those children again." Hopalong nodded. "Then you're going to need help." He leaned back, hat resting on the edge of the chair. "I've dealt with snakes before," he said. "Reynolds just wears cleaner boots." The next day, Lucy tried to visit the mayor to report the attack. But his office was locked, and no one answered the door when she walked back to town square. Someone had painted a message on the school's broken wall, "Leave or burn again," that night. Lucy didn't cry. She packed her old books, the ones saved from the fire. She placed them in a box and set them on the table. "If they want to silence me," she said, "they'll have to burn the words too." Hopalong sharpened his knife slowly. Watching the front door, he had seen how towns rot from fear, and how courage starts with just one person. He had also seen how bullies fall when someone finally says no. As the wind blew through the valley, something was changing in Carterville. The teacher still had enemies, but now she had a friend who didn't scare easy, and Bart Reynolds was about to learn that even the quiet ones can strike. And the sun was rising slowly behind the hills, casting long shadows across Carterville. Lucy was sweeping ash from her porch when she heard a knock at the door. She opened it to find a small boy with dirt on his face and a wooden toy gun in his hand. "I'm not scared of them," he said, standing as tall as he could. "My name's Tommy, and I want to help you." Lucy blinked, surprised. "Help me?" Tommy nodded, gripping the toy gun tightly. "I saw M last night," he whispered. "The men who threw rocks at your house followed him." Hopalong Cassidy stepped onto the porch, arms crossed, listening closely. Tommy's eyes widened when he saw him. "Are you a real cowboy?" Hopalong gave a half smile, something like that. Tommy explained how he lived with his uncle near the river. His parents were gone, lost in a stagecoach ambush 2 winters ago. He said the town had always been strange, but lately it had gotten mean. Men with dark coats come at night, he said. They talk loud and threaten people. He heard them say something about a plant, something about taking the ridge soon. Hopalong exchanged a sharp glance with Lucy. "The ridge is where the ranchers live," Lucy said, worry creeping into her voice. "If Reynolds is planning something out there, he's expanding fast." Hopalong knelt to Tommy's level. "You're brave. But this is dangerous." Tommy puffed out his chest. "I don't care. I want to fight him." Hopalong took the toy gun from his hands, turned it over, and gently handed it back. "You already are," he said. Just by speaking up later that day, Hopalong rode to the ridge, where a small group of ranchers lived. They were tough men, sunburned and quiet, used to keeping their heads down, but they all shared the same story: strange riders showing up at night, offering money or threats. One rancher named Ellis had said, Noand woke up to find his fence cut and his barn burned. Reynolds wanted the ridge, and no law in Carterville was stopping him. Hopalong told them to stay alert and not to sign anything. "I'll get you proof," he promised. But we need to move fast. He sent Windy, his oldest friend, to the next town to fetch the circuit judge. If they could prove Reynolds was using fear and violence to grab land, maybe justice had a chance. Windy rode off that evening, with dust kicking behind him like a trail of smoke. Hopalong stayed behind, eyes always scanning the hills. That night, Lucy tried to rebuild a small corner of the school with salvaged wood. Tommy helped, hammering crooked nails with pride. Suddenly, the wind shifted, and they heard footsteps fast and heavy. A masked man ran toward them from the trees, carrying a torch before Lucy could scream. Hopalong was already running. He tackled the man mid-stride, knocking the torch into the dirt. The man fought like a snake. But Hopalong was quicker. He pulled off the mask. It was one of Reynolds' ranch hands. "Why burn it again?" Hopalong demanded. "The school's already gone." The man spit in the dirt. "She won't leave. The boss says she's macking people brave." Hopalong tied the man to a tree and sent for the sheriff. But when Sheriff Jenkins arrived, he looked at the man, then at Hopalong. "This fella claims you attacked him," Jenkins said coldly. Hopalong raised an eyebrow with a burning torch in his hand. Jenkins shrugged. "No proof, no charge." And just like that, the sheriff cut the man loose. Lucy stared in disbelief. "They don't even try to hide it." Hopalong helped her to her feet. "They don't need to yet, but that was about to change." The next morning, a rider returned to town, but it wasn't Windy. It was Windy's horse, riderless, blood on the saddle. Hopalong walked up slowly, placed a hand on the horse's neck, and whispered. "They knew," he said softly. "They stopped him." Lucy gasped. "You think he's—" "I don't know," Hopalong said, his jaw tight. "But Reynolds is making his move faster than we thought." Tommy stood near the steps, his toy gun now tucked into his belt like a real weapon. Hopalong looked at him, then at the schoolhouse, then toward the hills. "It's time we stop waiting for justice to come," he said. "Now we take it to them." The next morning, Hopalong Cassidy stood at the edge of Carterville's canyon trail. The wind was sharp, cutting through the rocks like a whisper. Lucy had found an old map inside her father's journal. It showed a hidden path behind the Canyuna Trail no one used anymore. She believed her father had left something there, maybe proof, maybe a message. Hopalong agreed to ride with her. They took only what they needed: 2 canteens, a lantern, a rope, and Lucy's father's journal. Tommy begged to come too, but Hopalong shook his head. "Not this time, kid," he said. "If anything happens to us, you'll be the one to warn the town." Tommy nodded. His jaw clenched like a soldier. The trail into the canyon was narrow and rough. Dust kicked up behind their horses, and the sun vanished behind the stone walls. Birds flew from the rocks above, startled by something unseen. Lucy rode quietly, her eyes scanning the cliffs. She whispered, "I used to come here with Papa." Then she added, "He stopped one day and never spoke of it again." At the far end of the canyon, they found a small wooden shack half buried under vines. It was silent, untouched, like time had forgotten it inside. Cobwebs danced in the corners, and the air smelled of old smoke. Hopalong lit the lantern and stepped in. On the back wall, behind a broken shelf, was a loose floorboard. Beneath it they found a hidden metal box. Inside the box were documents, land records, maps, letters, and one thing more, a signed confession, written in shaky handwriting. It named Bart Reynolds, and listed every ranch stolen, every bribe paid, and the men he paid off. Lucy stared at the paper, her hands trembling. "This is what Papa died for," she whispered. Tears in her eyes, Hopalong folded the paper carefully. "This is enough to take Reynolds down if we live long enough to deliver it." Just then, a loud crack echoed through the canyon. Hopalong pulled Lucy down behind a rock as a bullet struck the shack. "We're not alone," he said, his voice low. Reynolds' men had followed them, 3 riders at the top of the cliff, rifles aimed, trying to trap them below. Hopalong scanned the rock walls for an escape. "There's an old tunnel behind the shack," Lucy said suddenly. "Papa used it once." Without wasting a second, they rushed inside. The tunnel was narrow, damp, and smelled of mold. Hopalong held the lantern high, leading the way. Gunshots echoed behind them as the outlaws fired blindly into the canyon. They ran for what felt like forever. The tunnel twisted and turned until it opened near an old creek far from town. They emerged dirty, breathless and alive. Lucy collapsed on a rock, holding the papers tight. Hopalong listened. Waited, but no one had followed. "We got what we came for," he said. "But now we need to make it count." Meanwhile, back in town, Wendy's body had not been found. Only his saddlebag had been dropped outside the saloon. Inside it was a message. Burned into leather with a knife. No more warnings. The townsfolk whispered in fear. The mayor refused to speak. The sheriff stayed locked in his office. People stopped leaving their homes, and children no longer played in the streets. But not everyone was afraid. Ellis, the rancher, had gathered a few brave men. They met at night. "In barns and cellars, Reynolds thinks he owns us," Ellis said. "But if we all stand together, he owns nothing." When Hopalong and Lucy returned to town, they brought more than just documents. They brought hope. Lucy placed the evidence inside a metal box and gave it to Ellis. "If anything happens to us, take this to the judge," she said. Ellis nodded, understanding what it meant. That night, Hopalong walked the edge of town, watching the shadows. He knew Reynolds wouldn't go down without a fight. He also knew someone in town was feeding Reynolds information, a traitor, close by, pretending to be a friend. Lucy sat on the steps of her cabin, the stars above twinkling like distant gun sparks. "Do you think we'll win?" Lucy asked softly. Hopalong looked up at the night sky. "If we don't," he said, "they'll burn more than just buildings." He paused, then added, "But if we stand now, Carterville might finally breathe free again." The sun rose heavy over Carterville, but the air felt colder than usual. Shutters stayed closed, shop doors didn't open, and the people moved like shadows. Word had spread Hopalong. Cassidy was back in town. He had something that could destroy Bart Reynolds. But Reynolds wasn't going to wait quietly. He was preparing his strike, and this time, he wouldn't just burn a school. He wanted the town under his boot forever, inside the old church. Hopalong stood before a small group of townsfolk: Lucy, Ellis, the rancher, Pete, the storekeeper, and 3 others brave enough to show up. On the table lay the papers found in the canyon, proof of fraud, threats, and murders. "This is our chance," Hopalong said. "But we have to act fast and smart." Pete raised his hand slowly. "Even if we bring this to the judge, what if Reynolds finds out first?" "He already knows," Lucy said, holding up a burned scrap from her doorstep. It had just one word: leave. Ellis slammed his fist on the table. "I say we fight. We take up arms and throw him out." But Hopalong shook his head. "If we turn this into a gunfight, we lose everything, including the town." Outside, Reynolds was already moving. He rode into Carterville with 10 armed men behind him. He met with the mayor in private, slipped something heavy into his hand. An hour later, a notice was nailed to the church door: "School and church closed by order of the mayor." Lucy read it out loud to the people. Her voice shaking, the crowd outside murmured, confused and angry. A mother cried, "Where will our children go now?" A man whispered, "Reynolds runs this place." But then Tommy stepped forward, his toy gun tucked into his belt. He looked up at the grown-ups and said, "We're stronger together." Some people smiled, some turned away in shame, but the message had landed. Hopalong saw it too. The town was waking up, but slowly, cautiously. Afraid to believe it could fight back, he decided it was time to push harder that night. Hopalong rode into Reynolds' territory alone. He stood outside the rich man's ranch house. Hands raised but fearless, Reynolds stepped out onto the porch, sipping from a silver cup. "Well, Cassidy," he said, "you've caused quite a stir." Hopalong didn't flinch. "I found the papers." Reynolds chuckled and I'll give the town a chance to fix this the right way. Hopalong said, "But if anything happens to Lucy, Tommy, or Wendy?" "I won't wait for the law," Reynolds laughed. But there was ice behind his smile. "Then you'd better hope the law shows up fast," he said, turning back into his house. As Hopalong rode away, one of Reynolds' men watched him from the trees. "Should we kill him now?" he asked. Reynolds shook his head. "Not yet. Let the town see him fail first." Back in Carterville, the tension cracked like dry wood. Some townsfolk sided with Hopalong and Lucy, ready to take a stand. Others still feared Reynolds, believing he'd burn them out or worse. Even the sheriff kept his distance, unsure where to throw his loyalty. Ellis held a quiet meeting in his barn. 20 men came, some with rifles, some with only words. "If we wait for someone else to fix this, we'll be dead by winter," Ellis said. "We have the truth, and we have each other. But then the barn door slammed open, and someone rushed in breathless. "They've taken Windy," the man cried. "Reynolds' men got him near the old mill." Hopalong stood up fast. "Where?" "The canyon road," the man said. "They were headed toward the ridge." Hopalong didn't wait. He grabbed his rifle and rode hard into the night. Lucy tried to follow, but Ellis held her back. "If they take Cassidy too, we lose everything," he said. She bit her lip but didn't argue. Under the moonlight, Hopalong reached the old mill. Windy's hat lay in the dirt, and bootprints led into the trees. He heard voices ahead, laughing, planning. They were going to hang Windy before dawn to send a message. Hopalong crouched low, rifle steady. He didn't care about justice anymore. Not tonight. He cared about his friend, and about keeping the fire of courage alive in Carterville. One wrong move, and the town would fall into silence again. But if he made the right one, he could spark a war the people would finish. The first light of dawn spilled over the hills like a golden warning. Hopalong Cassidy moved silently through the trees, his boots pressing into the cool dirt ahead. He saw them, Reynolds' men, 6 in total, standing near an old hanging tree. A noose swayed gently from a branch, and below it, Windy was tied to a post, blood on his lip. One of the outlaws laughed. "A message in rope is louder than one in ink." Hopalong narrowed his eyes. He crept forward through the underbrush, every step careful, quiet. Then he saw it. A ridge above the men, perfect for a shot. He climbed it fast but low, laid flat, and aimed his rifle. One deep breath, one steady trigger. First shot rang out and dropped the man holding the noose. Chaos exploded. Windy ducked as bullets flew through the morning air. Hopalong fired again, taking down another man before the rest scattered. They fired blindly toward the ridge, shouting, cursing. Hopalong rolled, reloaded, and kept moving. Windy managed to break his ropes on a jagged rock and dove behind a log. Blood covered his shirt, but he still smiled when he saw Hopalong in the distance. "You're late," Windy called out. Hopalong grinned. "You always throw your parties at sunrise?" Within minutes, the remaining outlaws had retreated. Hopalong ran to Windy and helped him stand. "We need to get back to town," he said. "They're going to come hard now. Reynolds knows he's losing." Back in Carterville, tension hung in the air like smoke. Ellis and the ranchers had gathered quietly, armed and ready. Lucy stood near the church, holding Tommy's hand. The townsfolk whispered, unsure if they should fight or hide. Then someone shouted, "They're coming!" From the south road, Reynolds arrived with 20 armed men. He rode at the front, cold and proud. Sheriff Jenkins walked beside him, but his badge was gone. He was no longer pretending to be the law. Reynolds stopped in the middle of the town square. "This ends today," he shouted. "Bring me the papers and the outsider, and no one gets hurt." Lucy stepped forward, voice steady. "You already burned the school, threatened children, and nearly killed Windy. We're done being scared," she said. Reynolds smiled darkly. "You think this town will bleed for a teacher and a cowboy?" A voice from the back answered. "No." Then Ellis stepped out, rifle in hand. "They'll bleed for each other, one by one." More ranchers and townsfolk stepped forward. Pete, the storekeeper, stood on the saloon roof with a shotgun. Even the quiet preacher held a pistol. Hopalong and Windy arrived just as the standoff began. Cassidy walked into the square, rifle slung over his back. "You wanted a war, Reynolds," he said. "Now you've got one." Reynolds snarled, "Take them down," but his men hesitated. Some lowered their guns. Others looked around nervously. They saw something Reynolds didn't: a town, no longer afraid. Then it happened. One shot cracked, then two, and the gunfight began. Windows shattered, horses screamed, and smoke filled the air. Hopalong moved like lightning, firing from cover, calling out orders. Windy stayed low, covering the flanks. Lucy dragged children into the church for safety. Tommy ran messages between fighters. Fearless with every step, Reynolds tried to flee through the alley behind the mayor's house, but Hopalong was faster. He cornered him behind a water trough, gun drawn. "Into the line, Bart," Hopalong said. Reynolds reached for his pistol too slow. A shot rang out, and his gun flew from his hand. "You gonna kill me?" Reynolds hissed. "No," Hopalong replied. "You'll live to face the judge and hear this town cheer when you hang." The fight was over by sunrise. Reynolds' men either surrendered or ran into the hills. The square was quiet again, but this time it was filled with people standing tall. No more hiding, no more fear. Lucy walked to Hopalong, her eyes full of gratitude and fire. "You did it," she said. "No," he replied, looking around at the townsfolk. They did. Tommy ran up and pointed to the school's broken frame. "Can we build it again?" he asked. Lucy smiled, tears in her eyes. Yes, and for the first time in years, Carterville felt alive again. Carterville was quiet again. But it was a new kind of quiet, not the silence of fear, but the silence after a storm. Smoke still rose from the rooftops where bullets had shattered wood. The people moved slowly, cleaning the streets, mending broken windows, helping neighbors, and in every face there was something new, something stronger: pride. Bart Reynolds had been taken into custody. Hopalong tied him up and placed him in the old jail that once protected outlaws instead of punishing them. The same mayor who had once looked the other way now stood pale and speechless. The townsfolk gathered, locked on Reynolds as he was led through the square. No one cheered, no one jeered. They just watched the man who thought he owned them finally fall. Lucy stood on the church steps with Tommy. Holding the school's new bell rope in her hand, she rang it once. Just once. The clear sound echoed through Carterville, louder than any gunshot. It was the sound of a new beginning. Hopalong didn't stay for long speeches. He helped rebuild the church fence, hammered a few nails into the new school walls, and kept mostly to himself. He wasn't the kind to seek thanks. But everywhere he walked, people nodded, smiled, or tipped their hats in quiet respect. Windy healed fast. "Walking with a cane but still full of jokes, you know," he said to Hopalong one evening. "We could settle here, grow old, teach Tommy to shoot straight." Hopalong chuckled. "I think Tommy already shoots straighter than you," Windy grinned. "That's what worries me." Ellis and the ranchers took turns guarding the jail. No one trusted Reynolds' friends to stay quiet. But after a few days, it became clear Reynolds' grip on the town had truly broken. The judge arrived with deputies from the next county. After reading the evidence, he ordered Reynolds to stand trial in front of a full jury, and for the first time, Carterville would have justice, not just survival. Lucy reopened the school under the open sky. There were no walls yet, no roof, just benches and a blackboard, but every seat was full. Even the quietest children came running when the bell rang. Tommy sat in the front row, proud and eager. He looked back at Hopalong once and gave a small salute. Hopalong tipped his hat in return that night. The townsfolk threw a small celebration. There was stew, bread, music, and laughter. People danced in the street. Old friends hugged. And even the sheriff, now stripped of power, stood off to the side, unsure where he belonged. Lucy stepped forward with a piece of paper and handed it to Hopalong. He read it slowly, then raised an eyebrow. "You want me to be the new sheriff?" Lucy smiled. "You're the only one we trust." Hopalong looked around, saw the smiling faces, the repaired homes, the hopeful eyes. Then he looked out toward the horizon, where the hills stretched far and free. "I'm not meant to settle," he said, "but I'll ride through whenever the wind brings me back." Lucy nodded, understanding without needing more words. Before sunrise, Hopalong packed his saddlebag and tied it to his horse. Windy walked out to meet him, limping but grinning. "You're really going?" he asked. Hopalong nodded. "You'll keep the kid out of trouble?" "I'll try," Windy said, "but I think he's got more of you in him than he does of me." As Hopalong mounted his horse, Lucy and Tommy walked over. Tommy held up something smaller, polished silver badge. "I want you to have it," he said. "Even if you're not staying," Hopalong took it gently, looked at it, then tucked it into his coat. "Thank you, partner," he said, shaking Tommy's hand. Lucy looked up at him, her voice soft. "You changed this town, Cassidy?" Hopalong tipped his hat. "No," he said. "You just needed someone to remind you who you really were." With that, he turned his horse and rode off into the morning light. The townsfolk gathered to watch, silent again but not afraid. And as the dust behind his horse slowly faded into the sunrise, Carterville stood tall, a town reborn, a town free. Weeks passed since the fight for Carterville. The scars left behind were healing. One plank, one smile, one lesson at a time. Children returned to school, ranchers rebuilt their fences, and the church bell rang again every morning. The fear that once gripped the town had vanished like smoke after a storm. In its place was something new: hope. But one figure was missing from the daily life of Carterville. Hopalong Cassidy had vanished with the morning light the day after the celebration. No goodbye speech, no ceremony, no spotlight, just the dust of hooves on the far trail and the quiet weight of his presence left behind. Still, people spoke his name. When the school children faced something hard, Tommy would say, Cassidy wouldn't quit. When a rancher stood up to an unfair deal, he'd say, Hopalong would have done the same. And when the wind blew through the streets at dusk, some folks swore they could hear the echo of his spurs. Lucy Benton stood each day at the schoolhouse gate, watching her students grow bolder. She had new books now, new benches, and a flag hung high on the wall. But the old burn marks on the earth outside the school were still there. She never covered them up. They reminded the children that courage wasn't about being unafraid. It was about standing up anyway. Windy had stayed, just like he promised. He helped teach the boys how to ride and the girls how to shoot. Fairness isn't just for books, he'd say. It's for the whole town, and when strangers arrived. They'd always ask about the man in black who brought justice on horseback. Windy would just smile and point to the hills. He's out there somewhere, probably helping the next town that needs it. One day, a rider came through Carterville with a strange letter. It was addressed to Lucy, the handwriting neat and quiet. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside, it simply read, The world's full of towns like Carterville, but not enough folks like you. Keep teaching them to be strong, because strength without heart is just more noise. No name, no return address. But she knew who had written it. She folded the letter gently and placed it inside the schoolhouse Bible. Some words were meant to stay forever. Tommy grew taller, sharper. He helped rebuild the sheriff's station and organize patrols to keep peace without fear. He even asked Windy one day, I think I'll ever be like Cassidy. Windy laughed and ruffled his hair. Kid, you already are, far beyond Carterville in a small border town weeks away. Trouble had returned. A crooked deputy was stealing from the miners, and a widow cried in the street. That's when the townsfolk heard the sound-slow hooves, calm steps, a black hat under the hot sun. Hopalong Cassidy had arrived. He never said much, never asked for thanks. He listened, helped, and left. And in every place he passed, people remembered, not because he shouted, but because he acted. Not because he wanted glory, but because he believed in right and wrong. Back in Carterville, when the children drew pictures, many sketched a cowboy with a silver badge and kind eyes when the wind howled through the canyon. The ranchers still said, That's him, ridin' past the stars. And when Lucy rang the bell, she did it once every Sunday for the town, for the children, and for the man who reminded them all what courage looked like. Some legends are loud, burning like fire and fading fast. But others ride slow, steady, leaving behind better hearts, better towns. In stories that never die, Hopalong Cassidy wasn't just a man. He was a reminder that even in the wildest places, one good soul on horseback could change everything. And so the legend rides on, not just in the dust and saddle of old roads, but in the hearts of every person who once lived afraid and now stands tall.